Hey everybody, and welcome back to Movie Howl. This time, I, Ryan, am joined by Joe. What a twist. And we're going to be talking about what Joe was just claiming before he hit record was my pick. I picked the line of movies, which was the DC AU line of stuff. But what we specifically decided to talk about was Justice League Dark Apokolips War, which, after watching it, I'm 100% certain was the middle of a set of movies.
Okay. It's funny you say that, because with some stuff I looked up, this is actually set to be the final movie and it's called the DC AMU, the animated movie universe.
Okay.
So, I mean, I can see why you would say that. I might have said that myself had I not found out a little bit of background on this, but I get you. What did Ryan think of Apokolips War?
So I've watched. So we did Mask of the Phantasm, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the animation that was really good. Like the 92, 93, 93, right? Batman series.
I think so.
No, I think it's 92. Anyway, the animation, the quality was really good. Like, older animation is better for the most part, in my opinion. The way they used to do things. I mean, there are shows that are an exception to that, like Samurai Jack is newer and pretty good, but it's very specifically stylized.
Yeah.
I think a lot of anime is done really well, but what I've heard and what I've read is that a lot of these newer animated movies, they just kind of farm out the animation to the lowest bidder. So you end up with really blocky characters and really odd movements. And I actually thought this one did pretty well. I thought most of the movement was pretty good. The lip syncing was decent. So I was pleased with it because I've watched others where it was distracting. I tried to watch Gotham by Gaslight, based off kind of like an Elseworlds type graphic novel. And I was just so distracted by the poor animation. I couldn't take it. So visually I like this movie, but then, like I said, it starts off talking about an impending war, and the way they're talking made me think there were other movies before this. And I was fairly certain from what I had read before that this was part of a series. So I think this extends out. I know there was an animated Flashpoint movie, which I didn't know extended onto anything else, because Flashpoint kind of is this thing where it creates a parallel universe in that, Thomas Wayne becomes Batman and whatever. There are all these changes. I actually wound up playing a game with a guy who was using a poker chip as a buck to mark who the dealer was.
Okay, sure.
And I didn't notice anything about the poker chip until he said something. He's like, "Oh, do you notice what that says?" And it says Wayne Casino. And it's a poker chip from Thomas Wayne's casino from Flashpoint, which was pretty cool that this guy just had this thing.
Okay, I get that.
But I don't know exactly how this relates to Flashpoint, because it's a very different world than what it sets up. Bruce Wayne is Batman, whatever. I feel like it spends very little time building up this world, but it's also one of those things was popular around the time Daredevil came out. The
Netflix Daredevil?
No, what the fuck was his name? The live action movie from years ago.
Oh, Ben Affleck's Daredevil?
Yes, yeah, the Ben Affleck one.
Batfleck's Daredevil,
yeah. It was like that, because that movie had, I think it was that movie, it had some stuff where it's you start off at close to the end, and then it shows you how it builds to that. That non-linear storytelling kind of became a thing in the late 90s and early 2000s, and this kind of does that a little bit. It although it's, I guess it's not exactly that, it just skips the buildup. It's there's going to be a war, we got to attack now, and then you skip, and you're 2 years later. And then the rest of it is building up what happened. Why did they lose? Where was Constantine? Because Constantine's the main character of this, which I didn't expect, but that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I like that as well.
I also like that Etrigan was there when you see them in that bar, and I saw somebody passed out. I was like, that's odd. And then they started to fight with the parademons that were coming in, and I started to realize, I was like, wait, is that Etrigan? When he's like, are you going to help? And it's there's no way.
He's great. Etrigan's great.
He is great. Kim watched it with me, and she really liked him. And I was trying to explain a little bit, but like the origins of every character from DC sounds crazy just in with no context. I mean, it's not like they're much better in context, but when you're like along for the ride, it seems better. um okay, but I'm getting lost in the periphery. I think for the most part I like the movie. I viewed it as like an Elseworlds type story or like a what if, you know. And it's interesting to see a story where they lose and then how they come back from that. And like it was brutal. It kind of reminded me of Invincible a little bit, or The Boys
Mm-hmm.
in some parts, where like the
Yeah.
heroes are just getting slaughtered, and how all these characters are, character. We're used to them having plot armor, and nobody has plot armor in this.
No.
And I also really enjoyed the pairings of the characters that were working together. I liked the way the Suicide Squad was working. I didn't love Harley Quinn, just because Harley Quinn's like a little overdone right now. It's not
Yeah.
really a problem with the character. It's just Harley Quinn fatigue.
I'd agree with that.
And there were even funny moments too. Like there's a moment where King Shark just speaks normally, and Captain Boomerang is like, "You got to be kidding me! Like you could have just done this all along."
Captain Boomerang, I like him a lot. He was my favorite character in the original Suicide Squad movie that came out. I was really disappointed in the Suicide Squad that it killed him off in the very beginning, along with a list of other characters.
Pretty much the original lineup.
Yeah, but I liked him in this because I like that character. I like that style of character,
Mm-hmm.
and he was well done in this. I think overall, I probably enjoyed this, but I
Probably,
think I enjoyed it because of Constantine being the main character.
yeah.
If you took him out of this, I don't know if I enjoy it as much. Like in the very beginning of it, it's like I was surprised. They started the movie itself with the Alcoholics Anonymous slogan.
I didn't even notice.
Yeah, like the words, and it talks about let me, you know, I don't remember what exactly the quote, but
Yeah, it was like,
help
give me the
the things that I cannot change, and let me
yeah.
understand the
Except the
things that I
thing,
can. It's
right?
what they do. It's the line that is said in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm like, really? That's how they're going to start this? And yes, I also felt like you that this is part of the entail, or at least a continuation of stories that have already been told. Because I was surprised off tops that my first thing was, oh, I'm sorry, Lex Luthor's part of the Justice League. How
Right.
is how is that a thing? And so the way this movie starts out, it starts out with Superman telling everybody, "No, we have to go do this. We have to we have to punch first in this case. We have to strike them before Apocalypse strikes us." And for a character like Superman to be saying that, knowing everything that we know about him as a character, I think that's very telling for the beginning of this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting how that played out. Like they go, and then all of a sudden, there's a problem, and then boom, 2 years later. And 2 years later, Earth is not the same Earth that we recognize. It's a post apocalyptic world. Most of humanity is probably dead. So many of the superheroes that were a part of this have died. And it's a story about how to come back from defeat, which is it's very reminiscent of Endgame in that way. Like in Infinity War, they lose, and
Mm-hmm.
Endgame is about how they come back from that loss to try and make it better, to try and overcome what has already been done. Like they go to Apocalypse and try to do stuff, and the Justice League. I'm sorry if I have to quote South Park here, but they get effed in the A.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
it's who like you don't see that very often. They get put to it, and considering what they're going up against, like I remember when the comic The Death of Superman comes out, when he
Yeah.
fights
Doomsday.
Doomsday. And this is instead of parademons, it's parademons, but they're like Doomsday parademons.
Right.
Justice League loses.
Mm-hmm.
Like
They were
that's
calling them Paradooms,
yeah,
which is
paradooms, yeah.
a decent name. It's not too
It
bad.
wasn't bad. I did like that as well. But that's how do you beat that? A bunch of almost mindless, unstoppable Supermans
Mm-hmm.
who are just bent on one, whatever their cause is, whatever their boss tells them to go do, that's what they'll mindlessly go do until that task has been completed. How do you stop that? It seems nigh on impossible.
Mm.
But one of the things I found early on in this movie that I did not like, and I don't know if this is part of the woke culture that we are just immersed in right now, but the Superman that we get, it's really Clark Kent. There's this thing that happens to Superman in the very beginning of the movie, and then he doesn't die, but he's made as Clark Kent throughout the remainder of the movie for the most part. I hated it. Like I literally hated this this dickless Clark Kent. Like he's what I feel like he's what society thinks a man should be today. It's like what we're being told that men need to be this. They don't need to be strong. They need to be submissive to whoever their partner is, in this case Lois Lane. And the first introduction to Lois Lane is she's the one who's in a ring kicking ass and he's down there cheering her on. But even before then, he's unrecognizable. Even even Clark Kent when he's not Superman, in times where Clark Kent has had his powers removed for whatever
Mm-hmm.
reason, like that's when it's usually the most interesting. But
Right.
he still acts like Superman. He doesn't act like a little whiny
Bitch.
crybaby. Just so he's at one point he's talking to Lois. It's 2 years later, and he's trying to talk to Lois on this like risk communicator, and he like loses her signal, and he like freaks out about it. And instead of just being like, "Oh well, she's gone," and now let's get down to business, which is exactly what that version of Lois Lane was doing. She loses the signal to talk to Clark Kent, and she's, well, I got too much to do to worry about that. I'm gonna go handle my business. That's what Superman minus powers would have done. All right, now it's time to handle business. What can we do to get this plan going, to work on what we're here to work on? But no, he's like off in the corner. Oh, Lois, are you, what? I can't. It was almost unwatchable. It
Mm.
was so horrific. I could not stand it. And that was the way he was throughout the entirety of this movie, except for the very beginning and towards the very end. And it was real hard to take. I don't know how you felt about that, but it
I
could not get over it.
I did not I did not really notice that. I agree that whenever Superman's not super, it's usually when he's his most interesting. But yeah, I when they come to find Constantine, and like that was interesting. I like that conversation that they had.
Mm-hmm.
That he was, that Ray he's with Raven for one, which is a weird
Mm-hmm.
pairing.
Yeah, it was.
And they're trying to convince him to join them, like we got to have this guy with us, and he's basically like, no, like you can come drink with us or whatever, but it's like, no, I'm not doing your thing, like I'm not following you again, look where that got us.
Right.
And I like that Constantine's dealing with guilt from what happened, but
Which I
and
think
it
is
seems,
interesting how that plays out
yeah,
towards the end.
yeah, it is. And it feels like Superman is being submissive because he's the one that got everybody killed. Like Constantine had tried to talk him out of it at the beginning. He's like, "No, let's not attack first. Like, why would you go poke the bear when we don't have to? You know, to, don't don't throw us into a war." What did he says? He's like, "Don't throw us into a war like everybody else is bulletproof too."
Mm-hmm. Like when the Earth is going to be the casualties. Like everybody's not you.
Right.
This Earth is just covered in humans. Like it's going
Yeah,
to be a problem.
and I agree with Superman's plan generally. It's just what we see happen that it's overheard by Darkseid.
Mm-hmm.
I also didn't like Darkseid's voice. He sounded too much like just a dude. Whereas Darkseid in the old school cartoons, like when there were the new adventures of Batman and Superman or whatever, where there'd be like a Batman episode and then a Superman episode, it Darkseid had a much cooler voice. Anyway, just a weird like side note. Like I was
No,
not satisfied
I
with
thought
how.
about that too. The guy who voiced Darkseid. Oh my god, Trying to
It's
get
almost like
there.
they just forgot to apply whatever effects they were going to do.
No, it's this actor named Tony Todd, and I had just heard him because I just watched at least a part of The Rock,
Mm-hmm.
the old Sean Connery, Nick Cage movie, and he was one of the, I guess, evil Marines who
Mm-hmm.
was on the other team, and I recognized him from that, and I'm like, oh, yeah, I know that guy, and he's been on several different things. He was in Candyman back from 1992. He was in The Crow. He's been in several things. That in probably more. He's voiced Darkseid more than just in this movie.
Oh yeah, yeah. Tony Todd.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't
So,
he? Didn't he play? Wasn't he the main villain
in what?
in The Rock?
No, main villain was. Oh my god! Oh, it's gonna bug me. Now I have to click on it to get there. Main villain was Ed Harris.
Ed Harris was the main, but he was Candyman, right? Tony
Yes.
Todd.
Yeah, he was Candyman from the 1992 version of that.
Yeah, I'm thinking of like the big showdown between Nicolas Cage and him. But anyway,
Yes.
yeah, and then they had Shamar Moore as Cyborg, which Kim and I recognized his voice immediately from SWAT or whatever. Kim
Okay.
watches that show all the time. And then they've got Rainn Wilson as Lex Luthor. Like, I really did not like Lex Luthor's voice.
Yeah, I didn't like Lex Luthor in this.
He was
Oh,
very
really? That guy from The Office?
yes.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I thought any iteration of Lex Luthor I've seen was different than this. This Lex Luthor seemed more snivelly
Yep.
and grovelly, which was very un-Lex Luthor like.
Right.
Now, I did find out that who is it here? I'm gonna go back. We're gonna go to this. Yeah, apparently the Rebecca Romaine voiced Lois Lane, and Jerry O'Connell is Superman and Clark Kent. Well, they've been married. They've been married since 2007. They're a real life couple.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
But yeah, the voices were weird in some cases and good in others. Like I thought the guy who did Batman did a reasonably good job. You know, I thought
Yeah, it was a decent Batman.
yeah. I mean, I thought most of the voice acting was pretty good. That was supposed to be a quick aside, not lead us down like the IMDb rabbit hole. But I was like, man, they did Darkseid's voice so much better, like back in the '90s, like '96 or '7 or whatever, when that animated series was on.
I agree.
But yeah, I didn't notice Superman being sniveling. I really like the idea that Superman's continuing to do his thing, because there are a lot of stories where Superman loses his powers and he's just useless. But it's like he's lost his powers, he's in constant pain, and he's still like doing his thing. Now, maybe they did have him be a little bit subservient to Lois and like to a little bit of an extent like Harley, because those were kind of like the human ringleaders. But I don't know. I didn't feel the wokeness in this one.
I did, but it was just that.
I get where you're coming from.
Like,
and
I didn't feel like I was being beat over the head with it.
I think
watching Superman was real tough for me.
Yeah, I think part of it has to come down to Superman feeling guilt for leading them into a trap. And then the fact that if you make Superman too super still, it's not going to be as interesting as if Constantine's your main character.
Oh, for sure.
And I really do. I 100% agree with what you said, that us following Constantine was cool.
Mm-hmm. Like one
that
of
was
the
a
things
really
that happened
interesting
in
way
this
into it.
That I thought bothered me was the famous thing that Han Solo does in Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah, and Lois does it on the little...
Yes. She doesn't just do it. She does it twice.
Yeah, oh, does she? She does do it.
She does it twice. And I'm like, okay, the first time I'm like, really? Does she just do the Han Solo thing? All right. But the problem with that is, like, Han Solo is he's your height. He's the height of what a male fantasy would be. Like, all the men wanted to be Han Solo.
Yeah.
All the guys, all the little boys watching that, they did. I mean, Luke Skywalker, they wanted to be Han Solo. And so him saying that, she's like, I love you. I know. That it's an iconic thing that happens. And the fact that they reversed it, along with me watching Superman be what Superman was in this, it just, the first time I'm like, okay, all right, but they did it twice, and I was like, this
Hmm.
is,
Yeah,
and
I
I'm really trying hard not to see it through just that lens because I thought there was a lot to this movie that I really did enjoy.
see,
Like
and I
as
want
you
to say
said,
that,
Etrigan was
yeah,
great.
and
He
I want to
might have
say
been
that
my favorite part of this entire movie.
that stuff might be earned the way it was. Like, my first instinct is the "I love you, I know" was earned. You have some history in it. You have like this little thing of like, does she like Han, or what's going on behind the scenes? Like, what does she, whatever. There's like a little bit of that tension there.
Mm-hmm.
So when she says it, and he's like, "I know," like that's kind of a fun moment. And I did look this up. This is, you're right. It's the end of this series of movies, and there were 16 of them.
Mm-hmm.
So the Flashpoint Paradox, which is the one I remember seeing, came out back in 2013. So this is basically like coming into the DC or the MCU at like Ultron.
Yes.
And like, okay, I mean, you can jump into it and be like, all right, I mean, I know who these characters are from the comics, so we can do this. But yeah, there's probably some history to it that we're not getting. I had
Mm-hmm.
no idea there were this many of them. And I also didn't know that there was a Reign of the Supermen one. That looks, I mean, I like that story,
Oh, I think I've seen that one.
but I also saw the Batman Hush movie because that's one of the, in my opinion, one of the greatest graphic novels ever written, and it was terrible. It was like completely different
Oh,
to the book. It was like
that's hard
everything
to
that made the
take.
book really cool. Like Kim will not read a comic, no matter what I do. I'm like, please read something. Read. She was talking about like getting into comics. Like what would I read? And I was like, one of the greatest story arcs to get you into it is Nightfall. So we went to like Books a Million, and it's like that thick. It's like a foot thick if you get like all the volumes to make it up. And she was
Oh my
like, "Nope, I'm
goodness.
not reading that." And it's like I forgot that it was like that because I was reading it issue by issue,
Oh,
like
sure.
back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like I didn't have this daunting like a bookshelf full of stuff that made it up.
Kind of making me want to read it.
It's really good, and it introduces some newer characters and concepts that have been repeated since then. Kind of like the Dark Knight introduced tropes, or Dark Knight Returns, I should say, introduced tropes that are kind of used now. But yeah, I was like, all right, well, let's watch this because this was a really fantastic graphic novel. It was just so different. At the end, I was like, all right, I'm sorry, this ain't it. And she was like, I liked it. It was good. And it's like, but if you would take the time to read the book, which is right over there on the shelf, you would like that so much better. Like I watch you read like Wattpad books on your phone all day. Why won't you read a graphic novel?
See, but you can't do that. You can't take something that's a foot thick and turn it into a movie.
No, no. I
That
mean that's the Nightfall arc. That's that thick. The Hush book is like, I mean, it's a normal graphic novel.
Oh, okay.
It's like a large magazine.
Okay. So
So
why can't they just take what it is and put what's
just
on
do that.
paper in the film?
Yeah, just do that.
Like if you obviously know it's good enough to turn it into a film, just let it be.
Yeah, I
Get
mean they did that with Batman Year One. It's pretty much perfectly what the book was. Dialogue's the same. You can even tell like the storyboarding stuff what where they set up the frames. It's like this is where we're going to lead in. This is where it's going to match up for a second with what was in the comic, stuff like that. Like you can see where they're hitting these points to make sure it's visually very much the same.
okay.
And it's cool, but yeah, it's like why don't they just do that? I don't understand why more of them don't do that.
It's it's not being true to the source material. And
Mm-hmm.
so many whatever media that goes from a written print media to a digital film media does that.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't stay true to the source material, but there are some that do, and the ones that do can really end up nailing it more so than others. Like it's one of the reasons that the Star Wars universe has gone so downhill is because the people who are in charge of that right now aren't they don't care about the source material. They don't care about what came before or honoring the things that have already been done.
Right.
And so that's where some of these problems are coming from. But it's just I don't know. I think it comes down to a lot of ego. the ego of a director to say, well, I know that's what it is, but I want to put my flair to it. I want to do, or other writers who are script writers and they're trying to change things. And it's people putting their own ego into something when it doesn't necessarily need to be. Just say, I am proud to work on this. Like the
Right.
Lord of the Rings movies that came out, first the Hobbit movies that came out. One of those two, I mean, or three of those six, I guess we could say, was they were more true to the source material. Not as much as they could be because you're adapting books to movies. And whenever you do that, you almost are just inevitably have to leave stuff out. You just can't involve that much content.
Mm-hmm.
But one
Yeah.
did it better. And I think that's one of the things that's where we're going now with the age of Netflix and HBO and Prime and who all this stuff. And now you can have your own mini series of things. Being able to spread out something like that. That's why Game of Thrones was so good up until they outpaced the books.
Uh-huh.
And then,
Because
once they do that, they don't have this really great writing to fall back on. You see what happens. But that could be where we're headed right now, where you have these great stories, but you don't want to condense them down. You don't want to have to remove so much about a character or the ancillary characters or the story or just the descriptive world, whatever it is, that you can play that out more in these larger, more drawn out 8 hours. If it's 8 episodes, 1 hour an episode, that you can draw that out more. Doesn't always work super well. Sometimes they try and overdo things or push messages that do not resonate with the core audience. But I think that's a better way to go about some of this.
mm-hmm. It's a lot.
It is a lot.
We're talking a lot about this, and we're kind of talking around it. It did make me think that it seems likely that the comic this is based on is probably a lot better than the movie, just based on how that kind of thing has gone in the past. I mean, every once in a while you get surprised the movie ends up being better than the book, but it's pretty uncommon. So I'll probably end up reading it at some point if there's not a whole bunch of stuff required to read before that.
I get you, sure.
Overall, though, it has me interested to watch more of the movies from the series, to see what else there is, to see if there's more of a build up to this thing happening or whatever else, or even how much they connect. Because I know that it's one of these things where there are movies that are kind of one-offs. Guardians of the Galaxy doesn't really connect to anything else. And I'm assuming Batman Hush is the same way, because there was nothing when I watched that led me to believe this was part of a bigger universe.
I get that.
Same with Flashpoint Paradox, the original one. And maybe they just made it as a one-off, and then they were like, okay, well, this worked really well. Let's make another movie in this series.
Yeah. And with something like this is fine. This is fine to be a one-off. I'm okay with that. Like, I don't need a bunch of background. Yes, I was a little confused. Why is Lex Luthor part of the Justice League? Whatever. But it can be a one-off because you know all these characters. You know all that, and it's not a big deal. It's just one of those, like, I don't mind that with the level of knowledge of all the characters that you already have. Just give me this one-off movie that is great. But like I've talked about before, I think was one of the things that really makes or breaks things like this. And this is like I said, Justice League Dark. This is dark for sure. But the problem with this is, in order for a story like this to be really good, in order for me to be truly compelled by it, the villain has to be compelling. This villain was like, man, I know it's Apocalypse, and I already know background on him, so he's semi-compelling only because of what I already know. If you just take him as he is in this movie, he's a villain.
Yeah. I don't know, man.
Like,
I agree.
Powerful, but
yeah, Darkseid and Apocalypse is like his. I don't know. He's like using the planet. So Apocalypse is
Apocalypse. Sorry,
no, but I mean
that's an X-Men reference versus his actually name is Darkseid. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't even. Yeah. But Apocalypse is a planet,
Yes.
and they were talking about it phasing like in and out, like phasing in, like sending out a probe and then phasing back out like a ship.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what that's about. I don't know if that's a thing that just happens. And then yeah, you're right. All we see of Darkseid is that he like wipes out the Lantern Corps somehow, which is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I feel like that's pretty ridiculous. I don't know how he could possibly do that. It's kind of badass, the little bit of it that they show,
Absolutely.
but it's just so odd. They don't show the build up. They don't show like a why. Like Darkseid wants to conquer, and he's talking about conquering, but he also just kills everyone, and then he just patrols like destroyed planets. Why?
Yeah, that's not conquering. That's just annihilating. There's a
Yeah,
difference.
yeah. It doesn't
Conquering,
make
you
any
want them groveling at your feet. You want them to be subjugated. You're
right, which is
subjugating other planets.
and that's what happens in the older like cartoon movies and shows where they have
Mm-hmm.
Darkseid doing that kind of thing. Like either there are people who are essentially slaves to him that live on Apokolips, or there are other planets controlled by them, but and they're dark and they're brutal, but they're not just 100% destroyed.
Right.
And it's unclear as to why he needs magma. It's like I'm sure you can get magma out of uninhabited planets. You don't need to go through the trouble of fighting the Justice League like multiple times for magma.
Yeah, it was neat what he did with it at that one point on Oa is the
Uh-huh.
Lantern Corps planet.
Yeah.
That was kind of cool, but otherwise, yeah, it didn't make a whole lot of sense. And this movie does something that it really bothers me when movies do this. When they have something set up and you've already seen something happen in it, so they've established rules of how things go down. And one of the rules they set early in this movie is the Paradooms. They're not like one-on-one fighters. They will just swarm whatever enemy is there and kill them and rip them apart. Like that's what they do. It showed it. It already showed it early on in the movie, annihilating members of the Justice League by swarming them and ripping them apart. And that's kind of terrifying
Mm-hmm.
to think about that. But then you have what goes on towards the end of the movie and the Suicide Squad, and then all of a sudden they do the thing that like it bugs me when older martial arts movies would do this, or just any movie, action movies where the guy's fighting a bunch of guys and he gets to fight a whole bunch of guys, but they're like fighting them one at a time versus just swarming the guy and overwhelming him. And that's what they did to the Suicide Squad. I'm like watching this and it didn't make sense based on what they'd already established earlier in the movie. Paradooms
Yeah.
don't just stand there while one goes and gets killed because they have these kryptonite weapons, and then another one gets killed, and then another one gets killed. No. They all swarm you, and you die, and then they all swarm the next thing, and then they die. Like, you can't, maybe one at a time you have a minuscule chance to beat this many
That
versions
one.
of Superman,
Yeah.
but they're Superman. They didn't do a good job showing that. I felt like these things aren't just really strong parademons, they're Superman. They have Superman's DNA. They say it in this. The
Mm-hmm.
Superman DNA. A bunch of him, you lose. Like there's no, and this is the Suicide Squad, who they're not super powerful. Like
Yeah.
Captain Boomerang annihilating them with like kryptonite boomerangs. Maybe he gets one and then he's dead. Like King Shark might bite one with his kryptonite teeth and then he's dead. Like it's
Yeah. What? Why did he have kryptonite dentures?
I don't know. I
That was so
don't
weird.
know. Why would there be kryptonite boomerangs? Why would there be kryptonite shark teeth? Like what?
Because it's not like they made them. Like this thing of weapons comes out of the ground.
Right?
And we
Like
see
already
Damian
done, ready
Wayne
to go.
Robin take a sword. Like Lex Luthor hands him a gun, and he just takes this sword instead.
Like that at least makes sense.
Yeah.
There's options. There's a sword there. All right, you made a sword out of kryptonite. Got it. And he takes the one that he wants to use. I did like his character in this.
Damian.
Yes.
Yeah.
The son of Bruce Wayne. That was a very interesting and unique dynamic, and I ended up liking that a whole lot. That was okay. But the thing between him and Raven, that was good. But, and spoilers ahead, This movie does the thing that every single comic book movie from all time does. And at the end of it, it's like, oh, well, none of this ever happened. Like, oh,
Hmm.
we're gonna hit the reset button. Redo.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
where are the stakes when you do that? Like, for whatever reason, my daughter, before we started this tonight, asked, oh, can I go watch TV? And so she turns on a movie, and she turns on apparently what is her favorite Marvel movie, and that's Age of Ultron. And Age of Ultron isn't the best of the Marvel
Yeah,
movies.
that's a weird favorite movie.
But Ultron is great. James Spader did a fantastic job voicing that character. He should have been more than a one-off bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
Ultron is a unique enough and a powerful enough villain that he should be more than just a one, kind of like Killmonger.
Yeah.
Killmonger was a unique enough and a compelling enough villain that he could have been more than just a one-off villain.
And that's an interesting comparison because Ultron was this huge threat.
Yes.
Ultron was like unbeatable until there were like a lot of Ultrons. They're like, we can't let him replicate himself. And then he does. And then all of a sudden, like Black Widow and Hawkeye, who have no powers, are taking out this thing that was able to beat like Iron Man and Captain America. They're taking them out with arrows and Glock 26s or whatever.
Right?
Like that makes no sense. And they do the same thing here. It's like Paradooms took out Captain Marvel or Shazam, whatever they call him nowadays. They took out Wonder Woman. They caught Superman, the Flash, like they took out all the like super powerful members. But then when there's a whole bunch of them, like you said, they're just taken out. And it's Superman, like you said, it's like Superman's DNA. And they're just like stopped by this like dome thing that drops over the Suicide Squad to protect them at the end. And it's just so odd.
It's super inconsistent. And I don't like that. Don't set rules in your movie and then change them at the end because you want it to look a certain way or have certain things happen. That's not good writing.
Yeah, I've talked to you about Batman versus Dracula, right? Which is a Batman movie based off of the Batman cartoon series from like the early to mid-ish 2000s.
No, I do not believe you've ever talked to me about Batman versus Dracula.
It's pretty fucking good, I'm not going to lie. But one of the things that they do in it that I really like is Batman encounters him and he tries to throw a batarang at him. And Dracula just like sidesteps it. And he's like, nope, not letting you. I'm just not going to let you hit me with one of those. And that dynamic never changes. Batman never just gets to a point where there's like more vampires and suddenly he's able to all of a sudden they're not a challenge anymore. You know what I mean? Like there's no point
he's able
where it's
to
like
batarang them all down.
Right. They don't do that. Like he has to find another way to fight. And that's what they should have done in this. I mean, and I guess they kind of did with the kryptonite weapons, but that did bother me a little bit too. It's like send something other than the Paradoom things. Like leave them as a challenge, something that you have to like get around or somehow disable or trap, or when they come somehow reroute that boom tube to go somewhere else, so they're just out of the picture.
Right.
And deal with like normal parademons, which we've seen in cartoons and comics before, are like susceptible to powerful but conventional weapons.
Mm-hmm. Like they did a good job with the very end when Superman and Constantine and their little band are they're on Apokolips and they're trying to, I think disable the power source.
Mm-hmm. Blow up the core.
Win the day. And they run up against all of the heroes that were taken and then like reprogrammed and like half cyborged. Like you got Hawkman and
the Martian Manhunter.
Martian Manhunter was one, and Aqua Girl, but whatever.
Yeah,
Mira, right. All I can think of now is the
Amber
trial.
Heard.
Yeah, it's really hard to separate that now. And Wonder Woman, and that's a whole different thing, and that ended up being really good.
Yeah,
I really liked how Constantine ended that battle.
Right.
By using the lasso on her, and that was really good. Mm-hmm. And that was a compelling part of this. Like there are things in this that were compelling, that were good, that were well done. Most of them revolved around Constantine.
Yeah.
That's why he's the star of this. That's what made it really good. Any of the DC animated movies I've seen that have had Constantine, I've really enjoyed that, and I can see why Keanu Reeves was compelled to want to make a Constantine movie. I wish there would have been more because he is a compelling character. Constantine the movie had my favorite version of the devil that I've ever seen in any movie ever. It was just great.
Yeah. Yeah, I
It
agree with
wasn't
that.
like a big
It's a
thing. It was
really
kind of a small part of that movie, but it was so well done.
mm-hmm.
And there were some well done things in this. So I have to, at least certain parts of this, I have to give credit where credit is due. It is not, the things I didn't like did not make it, let's say, unwatchable. I did not hate it or anything. The things I liked overruled the things I didn't like in this.
Okay.
And Etrigan he was great. He was so, every last bit of him was great. Every
Yeah.
scene he was in, every line he had, liked him a lot.
Yeah, I miss the rhyming. I'm assuming that the reason he doesn't say it is that I think in one of the movies he's separated from his human half, Jason Blood or whatever, right? Yeah,
I don't know
Jason.
about that, but they mention it in this movie why he doesn't rhyme
Yeah, he's like,
because
"What's the
he
point?" He's
lost
like,
somebody really
"Yeah."
close.
I think it's Jason Blood because I think in one of the other DC movies that I saw a little bit of, they like separate them into Etrigan and the human. Because remember, there's like a whole incantation thing that he says to bring about Etrigan. Like Jason Blood is like cursed with
Okay,
Etrigan as his other half. Anyway, I
yeah,
think that's what it was. Yeah, he was fun. I like how he likes Damien. He's like, I like him. And
yes,
then he's like, if you steal anything, I'll cut your hands off. And Etrigan, you think he's asleep? He's like, I really like him. And he
yes, he was.
takes a bite of like his turkey leg or whatever he's got.
He was a great character in this. I liked him a lot, and he
Yeah.
wasn't like a major thing. He wasn't overdone. He was just good. He was enjoyable.
Yeah. All right, man. So what do you think overall? We've talked a lot about it. I think they had some good I think they had good points. I think they had things where maybe they were limited by the medium or like whatever rating they had, how that
Mhm.
was being released. I think they did a good job overall. They've done their job that I'm interested enough to go back and possibly watch some of the other movies. It's just I've been thrown off by the art style and the animation by some of them before, but if I give it a shot, maybe I'll like them. But I would say it's
No,
probably worth a watch.
yeah, it's hard for me not to like this. In the if only for the fact that DC, their animated universe is just better. It's as far as comic books goes, it is the number one.
Yeah.
I know Marvel killed it in theaters with the MCU and all, and okay, props to them. But for the animated stuff, which I know isn't nearly as popular and isn't doesn't make nearly as much money, I get all that. But for the animated stuff, DC has always crushed it in comparison to Marvel. And
Mm-hmm.
this was well done. I liked a good bit about it, but the fact that the bad guy is uncompelling, the fact that I hated Superman throughout, or Clark Kent throughout this entire thing. I Every chance they had to let him step up and just not be this kind of a weak, scared, pathetic shell of a man. They didn't take any opportunity to just, like, he was Superman, and I understand it makes sense, the idea that it was his plan and everybody, so many people died because of it, and I understand that having affected him, but he didn't feel like Superman.
Mm-hmm.
Like he just didn't have the same, I don't know, moxie. I don't even know what the mojo. I don't even know what you want to call it, but it didn't feel like Superman. I understand you're without your powers, all that, but you're still doing stuff. You're still trying to get something accomplished to make it better. Yet it could have been any other Justice League member, and I would have liked it more.
Yeah, he lacked the charisma that like Christopher Reeve Superman had.
Yes.
Superman always gets sidelined.
Yeah, up until they really need him to come in and save the day.
Right. When he needs to
Which
be
is,
super. Otherwise it's like I don't know. There shouldn't be a character with that much power. Superman should be a little bit more limited.
And I like how he was brought back at the end. That the whole dynamic with Raven the whole time. We haven't really mentioned her except for the one time when you mentioned that she was with Superman when they went to see Constantine. But she was a really interesting dynamic in this movie that I liked a lot. That she's dealing with Trigon,
Yeah,
like her father, and that's a whole thing that's throughout the entire course of this movie. That was interesting, and how that played out at the end. All of it was not. A lot of it was very interesting, and I did enjoy it. And I'm gonna have to say, overall, this is a watch. I'm gonna say, come, end of day, I'm gonna call this a watch, even with me not liking Superman. I can overlook that. The lack of a bad guy, like I thought Trigon or Trigon, however you want to pronounce it, was a more compelling villain in this than Darkseid was.
Yeah.
For sure. And the way it all played out at the end, Batman as one of the ones who was taken over, and he was like kind of a villain for a while. Like, you don't want Batman to be a villain. That's dangerous.
Yeah.
Like, that's real dangerous. So some things in this that I really enjoyed. And so, yeah, overall, regardless of how I felt about some of it, I do call this a watch. I thought it was good. Constantine being the main character. I like how all of that, how his whole storyline and arc played out. It was fun. I did not like at the end how they just say, you know what? We're going to hit the reset button. I don't like that. Because I think letting it play out from how it ended would be more interesting.
But it's like horrifying.
Yes, you're not wrong.
The way all the characters end up, it's like it's really bad. But yeah, it is. I mean,
it is, except for Raven and Damian. Like, it ends kind of really well for them, and if they hit the reset button, then that goes away. And I thought that was a bit tragic.
Yeah,
to do that to them.
So one last annoyance: Raven says the exact same phrase for everything she does.
I mean,
I think that's just a thing. I looked it up and I found a Reddit forum where somebody was asking the same thing. Like, if she's using a spell and she has to say an incantation, why is it the same incantation no matter what it does? And there was somebody saying, like, it's basically like chanting like Serenity Now. It's like just a mantra that you can say to like put yourself in the right mind space. Like, it doesn't actually matter what she's saying. It's just what she says, because that it's like the one thing that, as far as the dialogue goes, that bothered me a little bit.
No, I get that. I do.
King Shark is a shark. That was repeated quite a bit.
But that at least makes more sense.
Yeah.
Up until it wasn't. Captain Boomerang's like, "Oh, are you serious?" That was good.
I like that. That's just where it cuts off. Yeah, he's like, "It's been an honor," and he's like, "What?"
See, doesn't it make you disappointed, the little back and forth between those two? That could have happened in the Suicide Squad movie, but they killed off freaking Captain Boomerang.
Yeah. One of my guys was telling me today that she's got, well, I say guys is like a gender neutral term, but one of my staff was telling me that her dog, like when she's sad, her dog behaves really, really well. Like, you can tell that she's upset about something, and he just behaves super well and is super like affectionate and chill. And she said when she realized it annoyed her, because she's like, you could just act like this all the time. This has always been a possibility, and you just don't do it. Like, what? And
what's the choice for her to just act sad all the time?
I guess, yeah. Or whenever the dog does something bad, just act sad about it, and they'll chill out. He'll be like Fonzie,
yes,
man.
Your dog played you. Yes, that's what it is.
He's got to be like Fonzie. Got to be cool.
Hey.
All right. Yep. Watch for me. Still a weird movie, but a watch. I'm gonna watch the other ones too, or at least some of them.
Ow. Why? Okay, so yeah, this was good. There was enough good in this that I enjoyed it. I'd be interested to hear what all of you out there, Halligans, what do you think about all this? Have you seen the DC animated movies? Do you like them? Do you dislike them? Do you think they're better than the DC live action universe that they have tried to get going and hasn't gone super well so far? And if they wanted to let us know how they felt about all that, Ryan, where would they do that?
Well, they could do that through Twitter at MovieHowl, or they could email us like a civilized person at moviehowl@gmail.com.
Well, until next time, Halligans, I'm almost positive that he's been Ryan, which means
Seems
he's
so.
probably positive that I've been Joe. And we hope you enjoyed it. We really appreciate you listening. We do enjoy doing this. It is a good time when we get a chance to do it. We would like to do it a little more regularly, but we're working on that. We'll get better. We'll get better as time goes on.
Yep.
But until next time, Joe, Ryan, and we're out.